Bliss and Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a getting started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/bliss and grit. Hello, beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we are talking about being on the embodied spiritual path, and what does that actually mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? And today we're talking about the power of words, so how we are shaped by the words that we hear, and how we shape our worlds with the words that we use. But in particular, we're really dialing into how we shape people's view of who we are with the words that we can usually, typically, unconsciously use about ourselves. Now, commonly, when people head into this kind of conversation, this kind of territory, there are teachings that crop up, particularly in popular culture, about how we need to edit and suppress ourselves or pretend to be something other than what we feel. So a lot of what we're doing here is exploring shame, blame, and superstition-free inquiries around how we can shift the words that we use to describe ourselves and the world we live in, and therefore create different kinds of relationships and experiences and just views of what's going on here. If you're enjoying the show, we would of course be thrilled if you left a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. You can also go over to blissandgrit.com and subscribe. We put out a Friday weekly digest about resources that we're loving and just what we're currently into. And as you heard at the beginning, you can become a supporting member at patreon.com/bliss and grit. And tremendous thanks and gratitude to those of you who are already supporting members. We are over 100 now. Maybe 101, just over. So it's exciting. One last thing before we head into the conversation. Sometimes we swear, so if you're in company where you don't want swears to be a fly-in, you can wear headphones. Okay, here we go.
Hello, Brooke.
Hey, Vanessa.
So one topic that's been on my mind a lot lately, besides the nervous system, obsessed.
Yes, we're both obsessed.
The other thing obsessed with is the power of words. And I'll say what I mean, because I think a lot of people talk about the power of words, and I'm not actually always in agreement with what some of the teachings are on it. So we have a whole 45 to 50 minutes to be very clear about what we do mean. So let me just dive in. Okay, so if you all heard the Matt Kahn interview, and Brooke, you were there, we were talking about words, right? Because when I had gone on retreat with Matt in April in Portland, he was teaching about words. He was really doing a beautiful deconstruction meditation to help you start to release your grip onto concepts and beliefs. And so the way that he started it was by pointing to how people's words essentially shaped your entire experience of reality. In the example he gave at that moment, even the word enlightenment, he was saying, like, you think it's supposed to look a certain way or be a certain way. Like someone taught you what that word is. And he was talking about, of course, like people teach you through their actions, through the words they use, through the words they don't use, how to see yourself, what to value, what to prioritize, what to put your attention on, how to imagine love, what to expect, what a good life looks like, what a safe life looks like, and so forth. And I thought that was really powerful. I don't know why, it's not that this isn't something we all could have understood at some point. I understand what conditioning is, but like right moment, right time, right medicine, and something just explodes in you. And I got really clear, like, wow, okay. So all it would have taken, for example, for me to get a complex when where I thought I was a weirdo. That's one of my complexes. Y'all, if you've been listening, you know it, right? It's not really there anymore. Just an update. But it hangs around the fringes. So that was like a lifelong one, right? I'm a weirdo. I'm a misfit. So all it would have taken was me to come home one day from school, tell my mom that somebody was picking on me, and for her to have in innocence chosen the words, wow, it must feel so hard not to fit in. And your innocent mind's like, wait, what? I don't fit in?
Oh, God, newsflash.
Yeah, that's how I'm supposed to interpret this thing where this bully little girl picked on me? What? Right? And it's so innocent. So, no one is to blame. But that's a trip, isn't it? Like, if you slow that down and you realize that your parents' conditioning, your siblings' conditioning, their parents' conditioning, that all of these things are influencing how they'll choose their words in any given moment to speak to you about a circumstance that is arising. And thereby, they'll give you meaning. They'll shape the meaning you take out of any given circumstance. It kind of blows the mind, right? Especially since most of us don't have to go back very far in our lineage to experience real trauma. Right? Either you yourself experienced it in real time, or, you don't have to go very, very far back, 1 or 2 generations, and you'll see, people coming over on boats and the hull of a boat and slavery and all sorts of traumas. So that got me thinking about the power of the word, which moved into me reflecting on the power of the words we use in terms of shaping other people's realities, but specifically in terms of shaping people's experience of us. Want to take it from there?
Sure. I don't know what I'm going to say, but I'm happy to take it from there.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of ways that my mind goes with that. One is something that I'm noticing in myself lately. And the other is just knowing the tendency. So we can have all of these unconscious tendencies to view ourselves a certain way. And by unconscious, I mean literally we're not conscious of the ways that we view ourselves. And so those can often be identities around, you gave the weird one example, or the burdensome one, the one who never gets a lucky break. All these kinds of things are ways that I think Locke Kelly was calling them subpart personalities. We've had teachers, Kieran Trace and Eckhart Tolle, who call them pain bodies. So those things can run through our systems enough that we use words that keep demonstrating them to other people. So we can always, like something that's so simple, but I'm noticing when I write emails or texts, which these days all of us do plenty, how it's so great because it's written down. So it slows me down and I can have some witness on it. I'm so fucking apologetic. Always. Over nothing. Over my existence, right? I'm so sorry, but I meant to write you back yesterday, that's the word too. I'm just getting in touch to confirm that we have a meeting tomorrow. Just that word, just. Sorry. Like everything has this kind of, like this sort of curtsy and lowering head. Like, I'm so sorry that I'm taking up any space. And it's really fascinating. Like that's something I've been watching in myself, that tendency. And that's just languaging that before I had any awareness of it, it was the polite thing to do. It was the right thing to do, or it was just what I was doing without any awareness at all. And then I've also been noticing lately, because I'm at this stage right now where there's certain patterns that I've had my entire life that are continuing. But they're continuing in a much, much lighter way. And I have awareness. So we talked about this, I think, in the Locke and Matt similarities between teachings episode, where it's like there's this taking a tour. It's like now instead of being in the thing, you're like driving a tour bus through the thing and you're like, oh my gosh, I see out the window that and I see that. And you
I think of it like an It's a Small World ride.
Yes.
In Disney World. You're like,
you used to be one of the animatronics. And now you're in the little boat watching the animatronics. That's exactly what it feels like. And so it's fascinating because it's like the thing, the Small World ride hasn't changed, although I would say the patterns are much, much lighter. But now I'm observing them. And so one of the other ones, besides the like, I am so apologetic for my existence all the time, particularly when I write things down. The other one is how frequently and quickly I go to despair stories. And like, there is fucking plenty to despair about these days. So it's not like I'm making shit up. You know, like I'm usually talking about situations, political situations and human situations out there in the world. But it's like, wow, I really, and especially I notice I'll do it if it's somebody who I'm actually not that close to, which is kind of interesting. So a friend, but like 3 layers out. So an acquaintance, which is fascinating because what are we doing with acquaintances? We're trying to get to know one another. And each of us is like demonstrating, I'm this kind of person with these kinds of thoughts and opinions. And so with somebody like you or some of my other very close dear friends, it's just much more intimate. And it's not that I'm not talking about being upset about things in the world, but it's fascinating how quickly I go to demonstrating despair and using words. You know, feeling rage or despair or upset is fine, but I go into this hopelessness place. And so what I'm watching on the Small World ride is like, oh, okay, not only am I talking about the very real things that are happening in the world that very genuinely break my heart, but I'm also offering the gift of hopelessness. And the way that it's about me is like, I am the hopeless one, right? Like I am the one who sees the injustice and feels hopeless about humanity. So those are a couple that I'm watching in myself. And I just think that when we can get to that level, a couple of interesting things come up because, okay, I'm observing them. So some of the teachings that we would hear very much, let's say more in popular culture about that are like, oh, okay, good. Don't do that anymore. And like I was joking with, I think I was talking with one of my clients the other day. Maybe I've said this on the show. I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but there was a Saturday Night Live skit a long time ago where Bob Newhart played a psychologist. Did you ever see this one? A therapist. And so the skit was him as the therapist, and he would have different clients come through and they would say all the things you would say to a therapist. You know, I can't recover from my broken heart, or I don't know why I can't stop cheating on my wife, or I have a gambling addiction, or all these things. And the only thing he would say in response, just sitting back, like glasses on his nose, clipboard in his hand, was, well, just stop doing that. Yeah, but I've really tried. And oh my God, I mean, I drink 3 bottles of wine a night. And then I noticed the next day I bet all this money on horses. Well, you should stop it. I really want to stop it, but stop it. Just stop it. Just stop doing that. And so
God, it would be awesome if it worked like that. It would be
so great. It's like, and so we treat, like, none of us would go to a therapist who sat across from us and only said the phrase, well, just stop doing that, because it's insane. It's like, obviously we know we don't want to be doing the behavior. It's why we're in the office, but we treat ourselves that way. Right. So, oh, Brooke, you're demonstrating that you're the hopeless one, or that you're the one who has to apologize for her existence. Just stop it. Turn that frown upside down, or put on a new persona, right? Like a more bold, more courageous, more optimistic one. But it just doesn't quite work, right? And so then we just wind up creating like a harder shell around the pattern because we're just shellacking it and we're layering it with some new thing. So I feel like it would be interesting to explore like and something I've been exploring internally in myself, because it can be quite uncomfortable to see with a lot of clarity, oh my gosh, I do that all the time. I'm really teaching people who I am with my words. And I'm really teaching them how to treat me. And I don't like what I'm teaching. Ooh, like if I got to pick from a menu, I wouldn't pick those ones, but I seem to keep doing it. And I can watch myself like I'm watching a movie, act this out over and over and over again. But shame's not the answer. Like, why did you do that again, Brooke? What's wrong with
you? Well, that's definitely, we know, never our answer. It's never the one we resort to.
Mm-mm.
But it is interesting to consider. I mean, some of what I heard and what you said, or what I took from it was, okay, so let's say when you meet these third layer out people and you're sharing the stories of hopelessness and despair, one might imagine that somewhere along the line you got that's the way that people bond, right? Like that's some way that people get to know each other and they bond, right? Wherever you got that picture in your life. So it is interesting to imagine, because what happens then, it's so sad that our brains do this, but our brains put people into buckets and categories. So then the person goes, oh, great. So whenever I want to talk about this sad, despairing thing, I know who to go to. Brooke is really going to hear me. She's really going to be there. And you're like, oh, God, I also want the really good news conversations and the really light conversations, right? But I'm trying to think, okay, so I'm trying to think through really the question you posed, like, what do you do about it? Because I feel like I have used behavioral intervention with myself. And I'm wondering what I did. For example, I was always the person who apologized for myself too. I don't know if this is a common female issue.
I think it is a really common female issue.
And I don't know if it's also generational. Like, I'm not sure if all of you listeners in your early 20s go through this the way that we may go through this, because our parents were raised in a different generation entirely with how they treated women. But I know that I have a lot of clients who do it, right? You apologize when you're crying. Like, oh, heaven forbid, I burdened you with my heartfelt emotions, right? And I used to do that all the time. You're in therapy, asking for a tissue and going, I'm so sorry, that you're crying, right? Or when you're in a plane and you're sitting in the middle seat and you have to get out to go to the bathroom and you have to ask that person to get up. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Would you move? And I remember also seeing what I spoke about and how it felt in my body. Like, did that feel true to me when I was saying it? Did it feel like resonant? Was I speaking from a place of depth? Like connection, I should say, probably connection to myself, or was I speaking from habit? And as I observed all of that, gosh, I feel like what I did do was to experiment with doing it differently.
Mm.
Like, experiment with it. Like, what would happen? I mean, obviously, most of it is unconscious, right? Then it can start to come to our consciousness. Like, oh my God, I'm teaching people to see me as the insecure one, for example. That's another one we do all the time. Oh, what, me? No, I don't feel pretty like you feel, right? All of that. And then I'm teaching people to see me that way. But I have a million things I could say to someone, right? A million things that are genuine to me. So I think what I did was I started to experiment with it. Like, experiment with getting up on a plane and not saying I'm so sorry. And experiment with sharing a different story, like, rather than the insecure one, which was the one I was using to bond with people. And then I would watch and see, because the whole movement of that, the whole movement of the words and how we're choosing our words unconsciously reflects the belief system, right? Mm-hmm. So let's just imagine, I don't know, you might know what your belief systems are, but let's say, for example, when I get up and I apologize for making someone move, it really is because I felt like I had to apologize for my existence. That's really root what was up. So then, of course, it might be scary not to use those words. I'm so sorry. Like, it may be all sorts of uncomfortable. But if you do that without using those words and no one's upset and nothing happens that's bad, it starts to open up new possibilities in your being.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing. Like, what if you thought, I want to bond with someone, but I'm not going to use the stories of despair. Or in my case, the way I was bonding with people is like, let me show you my belly. Let me show you how vulnerable I am. So let me tell you I have problems too. So then you'll feel safe with me, which isn't wrong. It's just creating a certain perception, and it may or may not be genuine in that moment for me to create that perception. So, but if I don't do it, then what happens? Like, do people bond with me? Don't they? Does my worst fear come to pass? Do you know what I mean about that? Like, experimentation, but not. I know that I always get hung up around behavior change because I often don't offer behavior changes because usually enough awareness, something shifts.
Right.
But every once in a while, I do think it's useful when we play and experiment with like, well, what would happen if I did this differently, right?
Yeah, no, I think super useful. And what you're describing is taking those behavior experiments without shame, also
Yes,
without
always.
pretending. Like, I've heard some people do this. I remember a bajillion years ago, there was somebody who I knew in a classroom setting, so not somebody who was a close friend. But whenever something upsetting would come up, or emotions, and this was when I was training at the Rolf Institute, so, you know, we're training as body workers, shit comes up all the time. It wasn't like a history class or something where things aren't going to get intense, we're not going to talk about things. He would go, cancel clear. And then smile and walk away, and then like stiffen his spine and get this kind of up above orientation with people, like bigger spine, kind of almost like a actual physical looking down on the people, cancel clear. And sometimes he would actually like tidy, you know, wipe his hands and walk away. So that's avoiding. Shame is like, why can't I stop? Or I'm the word. What's wrong with me? I should be farther along in my healing journey. You know, so those things are not useful. And you're describing like experimenting with behavior without any of that. So like, for example, in my texts and emails, and it's fascinating too, to take these tiny little tweaks like you're describing on the plane, just not saying I'm sorry. You can say, excuse me and thank you, both of which are polite, neither of which apologize for your existence. And if I text people or email people and I won't let myself use the word just or sorry, it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's so great, you know, so it's like written so I can slow down and be very conscious. Like see the word. I remove the amount of just and sorry that I'm deleting. It's really entertaining. Or extra exclamation points. I'm not threatening.
I'm friendly and very excitable.
So just changing that is such a great little modification because it's tiny, it's visible, it's obvious. And the fact that it's uncomfortable means that something is shifting in me because I'm pushing against patterns, not in an aggressive, self-loathing way, but just literally what would happen if I just communicated with people without apologizing for my existence? Probably they would just get the information I'm trying to convey without the additional information. Oh, P.S. I'm sorry that I exist.
And then maybe you'll interrupt the feedback loop where your own words make you think you need to be sorry for your own existence, right? It's like almost like the more that is our natural flow and we're using words and behaviors and actions to reflect this, you know, mythological belief system we have, like I'm weird or we have to apologize for our existence. The more we keep using words that set that into place, it's almost like we believe it in part because then, you know, some people can treat us such a way. Now saying I'm so sorry is not usually the biggest deal. Any nice person won't think much of it, but it does kind of signal people I've done something wrong. And it can get them to thinking, like, maybe you did do something wrong. You know, you're always doing this and this. And that can start like a whole cycle in effect. You know, even bigger if we're always, let's say, only sharing the part of us that's in despair and not sharing the part of us that's like overflowing with gratitude and joy, then people could come to see us as the despairing one. And then maybe they don't want to share with us when they're elated because they're thinking, oh, I don't want to upset her. You know, she's got so much going on.
Ruin her despair party.
Yes. She's so and then we're like more and more swimming in aloneness with the experience, right? So that's one thing that's obvious. We did a whole episode on like self-fulfilling prophecies at one point and how like, you know, crossing your arms makes someone maybe not want to talk to you. And then you're like, I knew I was a loser and no one liked me. Right? But there's this other piece. It's like a feedback loop with ourselves. One, because then maybe no one talks to you about their elation just in this made up part of this example. But two, because every time we say it, it's like, you know how they say the brain is kind of like a computer, like the subconscious mind is just being programmed. The more I apologize for my existence, the more I'm in a feedback loop, almost like planting seeds that I need to apologize for my existence, right? And since the brain can't differentiate so well, like past, present, future, it's just like, okay, still here, still need to apologize for my existence. And I have to imagine that if other people's words shaped and conditioned us, then to a certain extent, how we're using our words and what stories we're focusing on are shaping and conditioning us, right? It has to be some kind of feedback loop. The giant caveat, I want to reflect what you were saying before, that cancel clear thing.
Right.
This is where it gets sticky and where all teaching kind of gets sticky because it takes some subtlety to have an alive relationship with it. It's certainly not about faking it. And it's certainly not about editing and deleting yourself, as that is harmful in and of itself. So I'm not a believer, like I've had friends who are like, don't say a negative thing. Like if you say, God, I'm afraid that my parents are going to be upset with me. And they're like, don't say fear.
Right, now the superstitious option. Yeah. Oh my God, you felt a bad feeling. You're doomed. You said it out loud.
That, I mean, people have very elegant teachings around this. Matt Kahn actually has very elegant teachings around this for people who want to go in depth on this topic. But from like the way my simple mind perceives of it is I'm like, if there is such a thing as a universe that has a rhyme or reason, it certainly doesn't give a shit about the words I use every once in a while. It's tuning into something much deeper, much more alive. And the rhyme or reason goes way beyond my passing moods, my passing thoughts, and the words I use. That's how I feel about it. So I never felt like that made any sense to me. I'm like, sure, what makes sense to me is to be alive. And alive people have all sorts of feelings, and I get to acknowledge the aliveness within me. But what I can understand on the other perspective is that it can become like a persona, like we did an episode on. It can become kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because it's like, if I believe as my persona, let's say that I'm someone who needs help, right? When I was married to my ex-husband, I kind of occupied that space with him more because he was really good at occupying the space of helper. So I sort of joined him by occupying the space of helpee. And then you start to like speak about the help you need, and you start to speak about your problems, and you start to share from that level. And then people start to look at you as someone who needs help. So they start to give you all sorts of handy advice, and they start to do things for you. Like the way, let's say if you were a little kid and you go home and you're like, Mom, I have to do this school project. And she's like, I'll do it. You know, it's like that. Like they start to do it for you. And all of that starts feeding a loop back to you going, oh my God, I'm helpless. I couldn't do this without other people.
Yeah.
Or you're angry. Like, why are other people treating me like I'm helpless? Well, because, you know, you told them to. Right? You told them to. I mean, you're innocent in it and they're innocent. Like everyone's innocent. You may have done it because with that person, you really got the signal that that's what they need to feel good. And, the empath just steps right in without overthinking it. But this is what these conversations are for. So we can start to have a different vantage point and a different consciousness and say, that's so interesting. What stories am I sharing about me when I can share 150 stories about me? When I sit with people and do counseling work, you get them for 1 hour a week, right? And in that hour, they're going to tell you some of their really deep core things, oftentimes the things they're stuck with or struggling with or in pain around, right? But that doesn't mean in that week they didn't have 5 days where they were gloriously in gratitude and feeling blessed and contributing to the world at the highest level possible, right? It's this is just one experience. And so in that container, it's meant to be like that. But if it was my friends and the only way I felt like I could bond with them or get close was to share just the pain I'm having, then a different thing arises.
Yeah, just want to kind of trace a little bit more two of the patterns that you brought up. So there's the self-fulfilling prophecy one, which you were just talking about, which I think when we can see those with clarity and in a loving way in ourselves, how great, because then we don't have to keep fulfilling the same prophecy we have about ourselves unconsciously. We don't have to keep getting the same feedback loop. Oh my gosh, I could disrupt that and have different kinds of interactions and relationships and beliefs and feelings. So that is a huge liberator to be able to see that. And we already talked about experimenting without shame and blame. And then the superstitious one, I just wanted to circle back to a little bit more because it's really prevalent. It's so interesting. I mean, superstition has always ruled over these domains, and organized religion has its fair share. I mean, we could say a lot of it is superstition. A lot of spirituality, superstitious, and then we have these kind of pop culture things like law of attraction and stuff. And again, it becomes superstitious. You will be, again, it's God as other, judging other, who's there to dole out treats or punishments, right? Which all of us have woven into our beings because that's the orientation that's been passed down, and we're busting out of it. But it's a pretty old habit. And so the superstition can filter in other places, right? So if we're not engaged in some kind of spiritual practice that says I need to turn in a circle 3 times and say what I'm grateful for, and then I'll get my treats, then it comes in more subtle ways. So recently, one of the ways, the kind of cancel clear ways that I was noticing it happening for me, I was talking about this a little bit the last episode we recorded, that I'm having this new vantage point and energy level for noticing my money stuff. So when I log in on my bank account and I feel gross and I'm like, all right, money, let's do this thing. And that isn't I love this. I'm cancel clear, right? I'm going to turn that angry feeling into a here I am, bank account,
money,
let's party. What it actually can be, and I just moved today, as you know, so that just involves a certain amount of money going out, not a big deal, money you expect to go out, but you're paying bigger bills for a little while. And so getting on my bank account, it was so refreshing to almost tempt the lightning bolt and just be I hate this. I hate it. And just to be a little tantrumy and to really give voice to what was the truth. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I'm so fucking sick of every time new money shows up, something comes along to snatch it. I'm I don't have the answers. I don't know, but I get to, in this moment, be exactly what I am, which is pissed off that something is repeating itself, which can disrupt some of the superstition and some of the tendency we have to muzzle ourselves. Now, if that turns into, if ego gets a hold of that, it wants to prolong it and it wants to turn it into an identity. Yeah, I'm the one that's mad. I'm the one that's mad about money, and I'm going to stomp around like Godzilla whenever I feel this way from now on, because ego makes it permanent and forever like this. If we can just let it be a very genuine moment in time, if that is what's genuine, in this case for me this week it was, how great. But I can disrupt the superstition that I'm not going to get struck by a lightning bolt. Everything's not going to go to hell because I'm the most ungrateful, bad spiritual person ever. How dare I be ungrateful for my great life? Or how dare I not be farther along on my path where I can easily do this and feel completely at ease. And I'm also not going, yeah, I'm going to be this one now. I'm going to stomp around, get mad. It's literally just the moment. And things get so much softer and can unclog more quickly, honestly, because we're just being whatever the hell we are in any given moment. And we're not using words to say, I am the angry one who's going to complain about my money situation all the time when I talk to people. Or I am the ungrateful one, or I am the whatever. So with superstition, it's interesting because I think we all have it to different degrees in our lives. Like, where are we believing that we're going to get in trouble if we're just whatever we genuinely are in a moment? Where does that come up? And how can we let ourselves be whatever we actually are in order to break the hold of superstition on us?
It does have, I think these things do have subtlety to it. I think it's why it can be very easily confused and grabbed onto and used differently, right? I'm remembering back while you're speaking to when I was in Miami and I had mold illness, and it was becoming clear to me that I had to move. And my husband and I were having conversations like, we have to leave our home, we have to leave our city, which he loved. And I was working with Kieran Trace at the time. And of course, what was coming up for me was some of my core wounds. I'm a weirdo being one of them. But the other one being I'm a burden, which is one of the big ones, right? And that's even the apologize for my existence. Like, I'm such a burden. I'm making you get up right now, right? And I remember her saying something to the effect, I'm sure I'll paraphrase her wrong, but what she offered to me was, don't keep telling Mario you're such a burden for making him move, because sooner or later he just may believe your story. And like, you planted the story. It wasn't real for him to begin with. And I actually found that to be kind of sage. Mm-hmm. And that's what's interesting though, because in any given moment, it would be easy to say that what was true for me was I felt like a burden. Mm-hmm. I mean, I felt like a burden for months as I was healing and meeting all of this inside of myself and coming to terms with moving and asking loved ones to come with me. So at any given moment, it would have felt genuine to just say, oh, I'm so sorry I'm burdening you. I'm so sorry I'm doing this to you. And there were certainly some where that it was what I was saying. But just because that was there, does it need to be expressed outwardly? I'm posing this as a question, not as a statement, like as an exploration, because I think this is all interesting. Because to me, I really got it when she said it, and she was saying it for me with Mario in that moment. So that doesn't mean it's a blanket statement for everyone. But I really got what she was saying because I understand how you can help someone's mind see something a certain way if you work on it hard enough, right?
Yeah, I agree completely.
If you work on it hard enough. And I understood that. And I was like, it's true, because in reality, I could see with awareness, this isn't a true belief. It's not grounded in anything. But when the belief comes up, feelings come up with it, and they can feel really alive. And there could almost be some relief. Like if I say, oh gosh, I'm such a burden. I'm so sorry to put you through this. Like, poor you. It can feel like a relief, because in that moment, he might then be like, oh, it's okay. Oh, I can do this. Or even if he was worst case scenario, to be like, yeah, it is really hard on me. I at least feel like I'm apologizing. I'm being the good person who sees that I'm a burden, and I'm apologizing. So either that's going to make me feel better, or he's going to say, no, you're okay. Mm-hmm. And then that's going to make me feel better, right? So in the moment of expression, we could say it qualified as genuine. I did feel that way. And we could say, I might get some relief. But how many times? The first time, the second, the 10th, the 20th, the 40th? You know, at what point does it not serve either of us anymore? Does it not serve reality to be moving from a part of you that is just a wound, like not true?
Yeah.
Not arising from clarity, not arising from love, right? So I think that's where it gets interesting, because I'm super into not editing myself, so I don't really do that. I am mindful. I will bring awareness, but like the whole, you know, we're using the words cancel clear as just an example for what we're talking about. That whole energy of, oh my God, don't use that word or you'll create it. I've never really gotten into. I'm like, I'll do the healing until the right words come out rather than edit like the branch to get to the root. But I also understand there is a certain amount where, like, you know, our brains are programmable. I mean, that is true. And so are others. And so how much do we keep moving from and speaking from what's ultimately a wound, ultimately not grounded in truth? How does it affect others? But more importantly, how does it affect us, both when we hear ourselves say those words and when others may respond to us as if those words are true?
Yeah, I'm really glad this came up because it's like important layers of subtlety. So some of the distinctions that I see between your example and my example, one is like the I'm a burden is on the layer of identity. It's a core wound about your identity. So my parallel in my circumstance would have been something like, I am a hopeless financial fuck up. It'll never turn around for me. I'm the worst. Mm-hmm. So if I had really leaned into that, it would have been like I am this. I am this. I really am this. You know, like that kind of thing. But instead it was
something like solid and concretized.
And it's reinforcing I am that, you know? And instead it was, I see this pattern. I have been watching this pattern. I know that I am not it, but it is still here. I experience feeling angry, frustrated. Mm-hmm. And so in my case, it would have been a way of sitting on myself in that moment to not acknowledge I feel angry, which was different than going back into the old core wound person. It is hopeless for me. I never works out for Brooke, you know? And so that turning towards the, I see this with clarity, you know, this is just a belief system, a thought form, and a repeating pattern because of, I don't know why, it's the mystery. Plenty of things I could point out and plenty of things I couldn't point out about why it comes to be. And the feeling of anger, I've spent so much time and energy turning away from. And like, no, you know, this is just a passing phase. We've been here before. You're going to get through it. All of which are very healthy things and behaviors and attitudes to take. And they've served me quite well. But for whatever reason, it was pressurized in this way where what really wanted to be attended to was, I just feel really fucking pissed off. I just feel frustrated. I feel really tired. And so because that was in that moment so genuine and so wanting to be acknowledged, it was liberating because it was what wanted to be acknowledged and really seen. And these things are so subtle and so tricky because that's very different than thinking that it's such a relief to just admit that I'm a hopeless case or whatever. You know, that's just identity getting its, you know, hands around you and being like, yes, it is true. So we have to play with it in ourselves. And I think you use the phrase like, what's alive in the moment? The alive relationship to ourselves and our lives and these patterns and how they move in us and how they shift and how they don't shift is such a close and intimate thing that can't be prescribed. We can't give the blueprint fix all for anyone. Thank God, you know, that it gets to be everyone's individual journey instead of somebody who has all the answers for everyone. Because we've seen plenty of people pretend that that's true and it doesn't work out great. So yeah, I guess it's like the way I picture it in my mind is, how close is it? Do you believe you are it? Is it an identity? Or is it taking the small world ride instead of being the animatronic in the small world ride, where you're like, I'm watching this and I'm a human being. I don't just feel like, because I can see the pattern, I just feel endlessly great inside because it's just a pattern. In my experience, that's not true. Sometimes patterns are really, really light like that and they let go very easily and it does feel quite soft. But we all have the ones that are more entrenched for each of us.
I think even that differentiation, which was great, won't always be true. So that's where it circles back to the fine tuning for you, because there will be moments when, even though, let's say, I believe I'm a burden in a moment, where me sharing that identity will be helpful and healing. There'll be many moments, maybe with your lover, maybe with a family member, maybe with a friend or with your therapist or whomever. There's going to be moments when bringing that out into the light has its own intelligence in it. Speaking those words, because sometimes too, when you say something, you yourself begin to see like that can't possibly be true. But the thought, when it was like inside my head, had more like heft to it. And then I verbalized like, I have to apologize for my existence. And like, even as I say it, I'm like, that can't possibly be true. I feel that way. But, so there's always going to be a time and place. I suppose what was interesting to me about this conversation is just when they become the ways we go to, like our default ways of engaging with the world, right? Like, how have we been taught with other people's words and other people's actions and other people's lack of words to show up? And how does that influence then what we choose to share, how we share, what about us we share, when we are like these miracles who are full of so much we could? And so where it gets most interesting to me is simply where you see patterns. So if like divine intelligence in one moment says, open up and share with this human you're getting to know that sometimes you feel like the piece of crap who's never figuring it out, right? Like, then there might be some real intimacy to be born from that moment, or some real healing right around the corner from it. But if you notice that, every time you meet someone or every time you go on a first date, you're already telling that story.
Yes, right. Or right, like kind of persona is coming out to play.
Like I have a friend of mine, she's so dear to my heart. And she was struggling a lot around dating. And one of the things I noticed when I was sitting with her one night, two guys started talking to us, and they were very, eligible looking men and, cute. And they were talking to us. Within 15 minutes, she told a story about how she was super drunk last night. She had like been hungover and like basically a story about her promiscuity. And it happened in the span of 15 minutes. Now, this woman has a lot to offer a human being that goes beyond that. But you can see, I don't think people should judge. I certainly don't judge promiscuity, like, hello. And I certainly don't judge drinking. But you can see how if you're just meeting someone, depending on what story you tell, it changes how they're looking at you, right? Because everyone's trying to figure out, like, oh, who is this person? What do they require of me? What is it they may want? Like, what would make them feel good? Like, everyone's just innately trying to figure that out. That's like an intrinsic mechanism of a human body that it's trying to assess that. So I thought, well, if within the first 10 minutes she said that, they're already now they're like, oh, do you want to do shots? Right? Like they're filing it into a certain compartment. Again, I don't judge if anyone does that. I have drank and I have slept around. Just saying, right? Do you get what I mean?
That you're putting yourself into a certain kind of persona and that you have a certain
the hard part for her is all she wanted was like love in a relationship. And then she's like, how come people are only seeing me as the fun party girl that they go out with and they have a good time with? And so anyway, that's obviously not all to the story, but it was an interesting moment for me to observe and to be able to talk about with her. Mm-hmm. And anytime we see those moments, like, I don't know, let's say you and I have the opportunity now to speak to teachers, right? When we do. So let's say for the first time we met them, we were like, oh my God, we don't even know what we're doing. We're so sorry, right. Bear with us.
I'm not good at this. Yeah.
Right. Like, then do they want to talk for 75 minutes to us? Like, when we're at the Science and Non-Duality Conference, if we're introducing ourselves as like, we're newbies, oh my God, we'd be so like humbled if you even came on because we barely know what we're doing.
Right.
We're probably not going to get people to want to book.
Yeah.
And I'm being sort of light about it, but like we do that.
Oh yeah.
In some way, shape, or form. So what I think is most interesting is just bringing your own mindfulness on a really nice, loving experiment, which is probably where self-love at the base is always the most important thing, because then you don't have to shame yourself when you notice the pattern. So always with that. But where you go, oh my God, that's so interesting. What did I just tell this new human I met? Or what did I just write in like 10 out of 15 of my texts?
Right.
Right? Like, that's so interesting.
Yeah, I'm not a big Wayne Dyer person. I mean, I'm not against the guy. I'm just saying I haven't read his work very much. But a quote of his has stuck in my mind for years. I feel like I heard it 15 years ago or something, which is just that you teach people how to treat you. It's so succinct. It's so simple, and it's so true. And it's always stuck with me because then it can just become an inquiry. If we all are teaching people how to treat us, what am I teaching people? And that is the alive exploration where it shifts and changes over the minutes, days, and years. But it's interesting. It's interesting to live that inquiry.
Yeah, and to allow it to be an inquiry, because it's what gets tricky is it's not about necessarily then trying to find the good things to teach people, because then that can arise from just another feeling of deficit. It can arise from
I need to be the optimistic one,
shellacking yourself
the
into
likable
a person,
one,
right? Yet, if we can have a really open hand of awareness and curiosity and play, like at first, just recognize you don't have to do anything. Like start with what Brooke said in the beginning, like start with don't do anything. And then just be curious, right? Like, oh, that's interesting. I'm observing, aware. And then at some point, the awareness may bubble enough where you're like, I'm going to try a fun little experiment. Where when I meet this person, I'm going to tell them, about what I'm really proud of instead of tell them about, what's really hard for me. Like just as an experiment. How does that feel? Does it feel genuine? Can I stay in my body while I talk about that? How do they respond? Does it feel good? Does it shift something? Okay, well, I did that thing again where I talked about how hard it was for me. Cool. How was that in that moment? Did I feel in my body? Did I feel present? How did they respond? How did they treat me? Did it feel good? Did it feel aligned? Right? So it's like, gosh, we have to just be gently curious, super inquisitive, and be really alive with the whole experiment, because I think it's true for what we always talk about. There's no actual rule book, but there really isn't. It's why they talk about spiritual materialism, or why Matt Kahn's always changing his teaching so that the ego can't quite grab onto it, is because these things, everyone wants it to go, okay, great. So I never say what I feel. Okay, great. So I only say the positive things. Like, that's what we all want. Bless us. Mercy to the humans. But that's not going to get you an alive experience. The alive experience is saying open, curious, self-loving, other-loving, inquisitive, observing, conscious, aware, and then playing with reality a little bit.
Thank you so very much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live, as always, at blissandgrit.com, and the specifics for this show will be within this episode's post. One bit of news, we'll be taking a summer integration break. So we should have at least one more episode coming at you after this, but then we're going to be on break for the very end of July through the month of August, and that will include a social media break. It's always nice to have some time to pause and let everything deeply marinate, or get the hell away from the iPhone, or both. So while we do that, you can have some integration time for yourselves too. We will be back for sure in the fall, right around about the 2-year anniversary of the show, which is exciting. If you want a little connection and support from us during that break, just remember there's always the Patreon private forum for supporting members. That's patreon.com/blissandgrit. And Vanessa and I also both work privately with clients all over the world. Thank you to the magic of the interwebs. So information about that and how to find our private practices, that's also linked on the Bliss and Grit website, or you can go to vanessascotto.com or brookthomas.me. We are so grateful for all of you as we head towards 2 years. It's just so sweet to see that there's been this amazing community to get your emails, your notes, your thoughtful feedback, and how much this has meant to you, and just to meet all of you. I mean, it's crazy. People from all over the world. It's really touching. So we're thrilled that we all get to gather together via this show, and we'll be back soon.